Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Woven Wings Live, where we bring you wisdom and tools for vibrant living. I'm Gabe Crane. I'm joined by my co-host, Rahul Didwania. And if you enjoy listening to us, please share our podcast with a friend. You can leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can also join our newsletter, which is linked in the show description to follow along on our journey. Today's episode is called Decision Making in Action, tuning into our sense of integrity. And our guest today is Justin Mulvaney, who is a conscious leadership and executive coach. Today, if you listen to our recent last episode with Nell Wolfhart, the coach on decision making, today's episode is an opportunity to look at this topic in a little bit more practical detail and actually workshop our own decisions and look at how we're making decisions, where we are making them from. And Justin's going to help us look at that today. So I think that, Rahul, let me kind of bring you in here. This was an interesting choice to go deeper onto this topic. And I think it does bring up a little bit of an edge for us about, kind of sometimes we like to be very buttoned up with our plan of, here's our topic and we're going through this, and this. And today's episode is a little bit more open-ended. So I guess let me just bring you in on, and maybe you could share a little bit of our thought process of why we chose to do this episode like this today.
Thank you, Gabe. It's funny because Mike Trugman, another one of our past guests, actually recommended that we speak with Justin. And while it seemed like the initial focus would be on something different, as we got to talking, it's like you said, Gabe, we saw an opportunity for basically an unintended continuation, right, of the decision-making episode. And, I was actually re-listening to some of it. And one of the things that was interesting was in the conversation with Nell, what came up was this idea of like, hey, don't just take intuition at face value, whatever you call intuition, ask the why, unpack what's underneath it, and use it as a place to understand what's actually happening. And what came out of our conversation with Justin was maybe something slightly different. Really trust intuition, understand where it's coming from, take in signals, not just from your mind, but from your heart, and most importantly, from your body. That's what we got in our conversation with Justin. And even if you don't totally understand why you're getting a particular signal, there's something to be said for leading your life in a way where you trust that signal anyway. And I find that it's really interesting, right, to connect with it, with that way of looking at it. And to more directly answer your question, Gabe, I think you and I, when we were talking about it, we're like, hey, this is going to take us into some different territory. We may or may not agree with that way of looking at things. Do we want to go into that? What is that going to bring up for us? And I think it was exciting, actually, in a lot of ways, just to name that and to, I think, look at our own growth edge, right, which is continuing to be transparent and as transparent as possible about what we're feeling, what's coming up for us, what our underlying perspectives are, and bringing that to the fold in concert with not just each other, but with our guests. And so in that sense, excited just to unearth our own perspectives and judgments when it comes to this rich well of discussions around decision making.
I think that as we go through this episode today, and we've heard it on the previous episode with Nell, which is a really excellent episode, and I really encourage folks who are tuning in with us to this and haven't listened to that to really check that out, because I think she provides some really awesome perspectives and advice. We are going to probably look at a lot of different angles or kind of frameworks for decision making. We're going to be thinking of today about stuff related to, as you said, our intuition, listening to our body, listening to different parts of ourselves and how we work it out. And I think in any situation, we can get kind of attached to any sort of structure that we feel works for us. And so, one of the themes I think we are looking at today is also humility and open-endedness around how we feel about things, why we think about things the way we do, and being able to really examine that. And whatever insight that you do end up taking away from today's episode, one thing I think that we always try to emphasize on this show that's really core to Rahul and my desire and intention for this project is that we're really trying to model a conversation that's based around learning and growth, especially around topics that are sometimes on the edge of what might be considered mainstream or normal, and really have an invitation to have healthy conversations, which involves exploring what you know and what you don't know and going to your edge and beyond. And so of all the things we kind of take away from today, I think I just want to frame that as well. If you're listening to this, that really, if you like listening to this show, part of it, I hope, I feel that for myself, making it, is that it's a certain feeling of how we relate with one another, how we engage with different ideas and turn them over and relate with them and experience them, learn from them. I encourage you to kind of lean into that as we go into this today. But without going much further, I think it'd be great to bring on our guest today, Justin Mulvaney. And just by way of introduction, Justin is a conscious leadership and executive coach. He coaches founders and founding teams to reduce interpersonal drama, take radical responsibility, and identify, understand, and shift the patterns that hold them back. Justin's training and coaching philosophy is heavily based on the work of the Conscious Leadership Group. He helps founders and leaders in technology and corporate environments use the principles of conscious leadership to identify and shift the beliefs and patterns that hold them back and build more conscious, connected, and effective cultures. And so with that, Justin, thanks so much for joining us for the show. And it's really, really great to have you here. I wanted to welcome you, and just for as some initial context and framing, just invite you to share a little bit about the work you do and maybe a bit about conscious leadership and what that's all about and how you come into this work.
Thank you, Gabe. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys. So, I'm a conscious leadership and executive coach, mostly work with folks in the technology sector. And a lot of the work that I do is to help leaders be more effective by understanding, more adeptly navigating and shifting patterns in their consciousness, right? Those are behavioral patterns, thought patterns. It's really working with their internal context around their work, how they're relating to and being with the circumstances of their work and life, versus the tactical, how do we solve these problems better, being out in the actual content itself. And I really follow the school of conscious leadership and use that a ton in what I do. And conscious leadership, they really have this beautiful way of demystifying what they mean by all these things. And so when we say conscious leadership, they have two really great definitions for each of those terms. Leadership being, or a leader being, anybody who wants to own their impact in the world, right? So for them, a leader is just anybody who says, I want to take responsibility for my impact and what I'm creating in the world. And conscious, what they say is to be present here now in a non-triggered, non-reactive state. And so a conscious leader is somebody who's primarily interested in showing up in presence, non-triggered, non-reactive. And really the primary lens that we're looking at is, well, what is your context? Are you present? Are you conscious right now? Or are you not? And using a series of tools and questions to kind of navigate and explore that internally so that they can show up as conscious. And what I found in my experience, that consciousness leads to more effective leadership.
Thank you, Justin, for that overview. And just wanting to understand some additional core principles or tenets of conscious leadership. I think one of them that you alluded to in advance was the idea of integrity, right? And that's why this episode is tuning into our sense of integrity. And would love to just understand, how does that relate to conscious leadership? Or I guess first off, what is integrity to you? How would you characterize it? How do you connect with it? And then how does it inform leadership and the people that you work with being effective?
The conscious leadership would define, again, technical definitions, integrity as a sense of energetic wholeness. And I love this definition because integrity for me was frequently thrown around in moral terms or ethical terms, or had all of these kind of externally referenced definitions. Whereas here, conscious leadership was the first place where they said, no, integrity. It's just, am I whole? Am I one with myself? Am I fully integral with me right now? That's the core question of integrity. And they have a really beautiful model. There's a couple different ways we can think about integrity. We can kind of attack it from more of a heady model-based way, and we can attack it from more of a felt sense of integrity. I like using the heady pathway to find the embodied sense of it. And so what they would say is there are ways that we can leak energy. There are ways we can come out of integrity. And they actually say there's 4 pillars around it. There's, where am I not taking responsibility? Where am I holding unsaids? Where am I not revealed? Where am I not being candid? What feelings am I not feeling? And where am I not making clear or keeping clear agreements? And when I check in, it's just so intuitive to me that it's like, yeah, when I think of energetic drags during my day, if there's places where I'm blaming and criticizing, I'm not taking responsibility. If there's places where I'm withholding, if there's places where I'm suppressing feelings, if there's places where I've broken an agreement and I haven't gone and cleaned it up, for me, I can just feel like, oh, there's a sense of my focus is going awry. I'm not just totally tight in here. And so integrity, we can use these sort of tools, and you can do an inventory on those things I just said to come back to a sense of wholeness. I'm integral and I'm tight. There's this in a really embodied sense. Jim Dethmer gave a really beautiful talk on this at one of the retreats of there's a sense of somebody in integrity that the gears they just click into place. You can feel it in them. There's a sense of clarity. There's a sense of conviction. There's a firmness to integrity. And all those things I described before are just pointers to coming back to that firmness of integrity that's really embodied in being.
Thanks, Justin. I really appreciate that definition. It really aligns with one of the main backgrounds I work in, which is Ren Shui, which is Qigong-based system for life cultivation, life development. And we talk about the totality or wholeness, and that really health, well-being, all sorts of different ideas of having a positive impact for yourself and on others in the world comes from this, from some idea we have about how we should be, or something that's disconnected in our head, but really from this deeper sense of integration, which is a word that has that same root of integrity, right? And that creates a sense of wholeness or unification within ourselves. And maybe this feels obvious, but I think this might be a helpful question for our listeners and for all of us to explore is, why is that important? Okay, great. Integrity, it makes you feel whole, right? Like people, okay, great. But why is it important to have integrity or a sense of wholeness in your life?
Wow, what a great question. I don't think I've ever asked or been asked this question before. What a great question. And I think for me, let me just speak from the I for this moment. It's just been an impulse in me of, there's a type of person when I feel into them, there's emotion where it's like, I want to go toward that person. They have something that I'm craving, that there's a sense of aliveness. There's a sense of a life force. There's a sense of that clarity, that conviction that just for me, as I move toward it, it's the experience that I want to have when I'm walking through the world, right? Because we've probably all heard this saying is we think we want things, but really we're chasing an experience. We're chasing a qualitative way of walking through the world. And in my experience, the closer I get to integrity, because integrity, there's a push-pull, right? Every day we're coming in and out of integrity, going back and toward. The closer I get to it, the more I find that I'm in the type of experience and the flow of experience that I want. But if you're listening, what I would say is, don't take my word for it. Don't believe that I'm saying like you should want integrity. What I would say, and in all of this work, what I tend to hold is experiment with it. Try it, right? Find areas where you're not taking responsibility, you have unsaids, you're not feeling feelings, you've broken agreements and haven't cleaned them up. And see where you're willing to take some action and see how you feel in the minutes, hours, and days afterwards. And find out if it's for you. It may or may not be.
This question and your answer, Justin, is reminding me of a similar question that I once asked. I'm trying to remember what the forum was, but the question that I asked was, we as coaches talk a lot about fulfillment, right? And then the question came, I was like, why does that matter? What if somebody doesn't want to chase fulfillment, right? And nestled in this desire for fulfillment is also maybe a feeling of like, hey, I'm not fulfilled right now. And it became this whole dialogue. And really what it came down to is actually very similar to what you said, which is just try feeling, see what it's like to be fulfilled or to feel fulfilled. And not guaranteed, but more likely than not, it's just going to feel good. It's going to feel like, hey, this is how I want to experience being alive. And I think what I would also love to just get a little bit more clarification from you on is, you alluded earlier to the felt sense of being in integrity, right? And I'd love it if you can just define that term, felt sense, for anyone that's listening and isn't familiar. And then also just talk about like, what does that mean? What are the signals that you use? What is this idea of somatic awareness, right? What is felt sense, and what is the felt sense specifically of integrity in your view and your experience?
But so, yeah, by felt sense, you said somatic awareness. I love the pointer to get simple. What I literally mean is what it feels like in your body. What are the sensations in your body? And sometimes people will even go, what do you mean by that? And then what I go is, what do you feel in your body right now? For me, I notice there's some tingling in my feet and in my shoulders. I notice there's like kind of a firmness in my stomach and like an ease and a spaciousness in my chest. That's what I mean by felt sense. And a felt sense of integrity, I'll just speak again from what it feels like for me because it might feel different. I'd actually be curious what it feels like for you guys as well. For me, there's a sense of rootedness and firmness. And I suppose what I would mean by that is there's a sense of weight. So I really can feel myself like rooted down toward the ground. Real sense of like my feet on the ground if I'm seated, my butt down on a chair. And there's a sense of solidity for me in like my stomach and my chest. It's almost like if somebody were to come up and try and push me, again, it like I wouldn't move. It really feels rooted. Whereas times when I'm out of integrity, yeah, I don't feel as rooted. Maybe I feel like more of a pull upward or a pull outward. There might be some internal tension. And I literally feel almost more flimsy. If you were going to come up to me and kind of poke me, you could more easily almost push me back. And so there's a real firmness, like that's integrity to me. There's just a firmness to it.
So this will be kind of maybe a transition as well to looking at some of the examples of decision making or actually like listening to these types of signals that you're describing, Justin. But kind of going back to what you were saying around feeling of integrity, why is it important? I think I want to presence this up at the front is that the first place my mind went to is, well, the very first place my mind went to is, I know, of course, right? I know exactly what you mean. I feel that very intuitively, instinctually. I know it. Then the second, almost immediately following thought is about, well, but how do we really know that, or how can we really trust that in different circumstances? And I talked about Ren Shui before, and I'll use that as an example. So in Ren Shui, there's a Chinese teacher that I have whose name's Yuansa. He's considered a realized person, a realized master in that space. And he teaches about a lot of the same things around coming into this sense of wholeness, this sense of understanding of yourself. And then that there's all these different patterns, as you were mentioning at the top of the show, these patterns that kind of come and get in our way that take us away from that sense of wholeness. And it sounds like something really straightforward, right? So it's get into this state of wholeness, work on your patterns and start working through it. But, as I've been involved with this community over a decade, I've observed within myself and within other members of the community, there are times when people feel all sorts of different ways about the teacher, for example, and how the information and the teaching is being given. And in their bodies, in their felt sense of intuition, they feel a very, very clear sense. And I put myself in this category too. I felt that way also, of this very strong resistance, or I'm not even thinking about it as resistance. It is a perception. I am perceiving that this person is being less than conscious, right? Less than a great leader than they should be or something. But then when I look at that later, how much is that actually truth and the fact of the situation, and how much of it is my pattern that's playing out in that moment as I'm on a journey to understanding more about myself and about the world and a deeper state of integrity, a deeper state of unification. I guess I'm just curious if you can comment on that. And I know we'll talk more about some specific examples from your own experience recently, but how do we know that we can trust a signal, any given signal that we are getting in a given moment, that it's an expression of integrity or something that we are unconsciously throwing up as a roadblock to our own development and growth? And I think Rahul and I can probably draw on other examples we've encountered as we've gone through this project, the show, in ourselves, in our perceptions, I guess, of other people we've interacted with at different times. I think this is just a huge issue, because if you don't have, this is such a popular idea within some of the circles I think all of us move within. around listen to your intuition, the wisdom of the body. But a lot of the time when we don't have that deep sense of integration and integrity, and really who really does like actually have that, then the body could tell you all sorts of different things at different times. Let me just kind of put that out and see, what do you have to say about that, or how do we approach and deal with that?
Comes up to me is, this is part of why I love Conscious Leadership Group's tools, because the fundamental question I heard you ask there is, how do I know that the bodily signal is coming from integrity and wholeness versus me and my patterns? And this is where conscious leadership, there are 4 primary questions of conscious leadership, and they are so damn useful for navigating everything. And the first question, which is pointing to what you are, is what they would say is, where are you? And there's a really beautiful model that the Conscious Leadership Group has, which is the line, right? So for everyone listening, imagine there's just a horizontal line. And at any moment, you can be above the line or below the line. Neither is better. There's just 2 states of consciousness. Above the line is I'm in a state of openness, curiosity, trust. You could say I'm integral. I'm really available. I'm in that capital S self. Below the line is, hey, I notice I'm in a state of threat. I'm defended. I'm in reactivity. Something's coming in here. The first question with any of this stuff that conscious leadership would always have you ask is, where are you right now? Are you above the line or are you below the line? And in that moment, what I hear is, oh, something's coming in. It's triggering a bunch of body sensations, but they're coming from a state of threat. They're actually coming from me tensing, from me going into threat around it. I would say in that moment, if that's what's going on, the actual thing is slow way down, because there's something in your context for you to explore here. And conscious leadership, the next questions you would ask is, well, 1, hey, can you accept yourself for being right where you are? You're in a state of threat. You're scared. Can you first accept yourself? And then 2, we can explore, are you willing to shift, and see what comes up when you explore shifting? But it's actually, don't just jump in. Actually, in its most extreme case, conscious leadership group, what we'd say is, if you're below the line, your whole job is just awareness and exploring yourself. Don't actually try and go out and do anything yet. And that's the primary tool I would point to. When that body signal, when you have something coming up, just check in. And this is where a coach and tools really help. But be really honest. Where are you right now? Are you really open, or is there some constriction, some threat that's coming in for you?
I think one thing, I'll just feel free to continue here, but just putting it out to our listeners and to all of us, just that answer to that first question is very difficult. Like a lot of times we're not able to be honest with ourselves. We kind of hide the answer to that from ourselves about where I really am. And I wish it was less common. I noticed that in myself, in my work with people as a mediator, especially like in conflict spaces, when we get riled up and when we're below the line, as you're saying, Justin, we don't want to admit that. We are very, very convinced. Even our whole conscious apparatus is convinced that we are above the line. And unfortunately, I think we see that playing out all over the world all the time. That's kind of our norm. I mean, when we're talking about integrity, I just want to underscore this. This is a very, very important place to start. And for us all to really ask ourselves, as you said, where are we really actually? And how can I really, really know that? How can I be honest with myself fully?
2 things here. 1, the Conscious Leadership Group on their website has a great handout for this. And it says, it's below the line, and they have statements, behaviors, beliefs associated with each. And the way to play is, if I find a single statement, behavior, or belief that resonates with me below the line, I'm below the line. And the way I actually play to combat my own bias, because this is such a human bias, I want to be enlightened, I want to be open, I always want to be there, is for me, I actually start, when I ask myself this question, I start by assuming I'm below the line and looking for the evidence that I am. And so if you were really invested in this consciousness work, that's the game I would play. Is if you find yourself asking the question, what I actually say is that's a signal from my unconscious that I'm below the line, right? And it's kind of playing this game of like, let's go see if we can justify we're above the line. But almost always, I know if I'm asking the question, I'm like, oh, you're below the line. That's why you're even asking this right now.
What I love about that practice, Justin, is it just feels like insurance. I think like relying on ourselves to recognize that we're in threat while we're in threat is hard, right? Like relying on us to be able to make that judgment call. Whereas what you've done is assumed threat and then allow yourself to recognize if it's not actually present. And I think that just feels like a really practical approach. And I imagine over time, you're able to make that assessment. Hey, am I actually in threat or not very quickly, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily be this long, drawn out preparation step, right, before you engage in some sort of action or answer the question around whether you're willing to shift or not. And I think, I find that very appealing and certainly something that I'm going to take away from this conversation. With all that said, I'd love to actually now pivot into a decision that you made recently that sparked a lot of this exploration for us. And what I'll preface with is that for our listeners is this is a little bit of a different format, right? That starting now than what we typically engage in. We're going to actually explore a scenario that Justin recently went through. And I think we'll use that as the bedrock to uncover different perspectives around some of the themes that we've already started to uncover. And so with that said, I'd love to just have you, Justin, explain what that situation was as it relates to your experience with the Conscious Leadership Group, and what was the situation, what was the decision that you made, and how did you arrive at it? And we can go from there.
So I'll also say, I did not expect this to be the topic of podcast conversation. Normally I come in and we just talk about conscious leadership the whole time. But we met right after this big thing happened. I was actually in a year-long coaches certification training with the Conscious Leadership Group. And as part of that process, there are 3 retreats throughout the year. And I was at the final retreat. So the final thing, this is the last hurrah. At the end, we're all certified. And halfway through, 2 days in, I made the decision that I was done and I was going to go home early. And so the analogy that I've made with people is imagine you're running a race and you get you're 2 steps away from the finish line. I was 2 days out of 365 days away from being there. And a series of events, which we can get into the specifics of, unfolded both very quickly and very slowly at the same time, which ultimately culminated with me going in front of the group and saying, hey, I'm done. I'm going to step out of the container here, right now. I'm going to figure out how I'm going to get home early. I got some logistics to figure out, but I'm done. I've had a lovely time with you all, but I'm now complete.
And Justin, if you don't mind sharing, was it, that led to that decision, and maybe even sharing some of those events that you were alluding to?
Yeah, I'll give you the whole story. So what I want to clarify is the story's happening with the clarity of it already having happened. So I'll do my best to synthesize the things that happened, but I didn't realize they were happening until afterwards. So I showed up to the retreat, as always for these retreats, very excited, also very nervous because they tend to be intense and bring a lot up. And I remember actually saying to someone beforehand, again, this was the flag that I didn't even register. I mostly feel complete. The one thing I want is the opportunity to explore moving anger more. Actually, a friend kind of flagged that for me shortly after I left early. And on the first day, I felt great. I felt amazing. I was having a blast. We actually did an anger moving meditation that day, which brought up a lot and really helped me explore some new places inside of me.
And Justin, can you clarify what that is?
Anchor moving.
Yeah, I'll give you the specifics of the meditation that we did that day, which we did a connecting the circuit meditation, which they improvised this. It was really beautiful. And they had everybody in the group first imagine turning on joy circuit and connecting to joy and feeling joy all the way through your body. And then they had everybody activate kind of the pleasure sexual energy circuit. And then they said, hey, look, now connect the anger circuit. Let yourself connect it. And as you can imagine, some people, there are these concepts of rage rooms, right? Everybody just started roaring. The room burst out. There was a lot of sound, a lot of just connecting with all of these. For a lot of people, we speak from the eye, there were decades of repressed anger in there. And it was just an opportunity to yell and roar. And at multiple points, I grabbed a pillow and walked out and was just ramming it on the floor and just using that as an opportunity of, hey, this anger, which I've made up is dangerous and not okay and shouldn't be inside of me. Here's a space for you to explore and allow and move that anger and just learn about it.
The channel, just to clarify, because I might have misheard it. I don't know if you misheard it too, Rahul, but it's moving the anger. Not that I had heard anchor originally. So the circuit was anger. The anger.
Anger.
Okay, got it. Cool. I'm
following
you.
Cool. Yeah, so we did that on the first day, which was literally what I said I kind of wanted. It was the last thing that I wanted. Now, I didn't track this. And on the second day I woke up, and what I'll say now is I didn't quite feel the same. I didn't track it then. I think I was a little more withdrawn. I wasn't as forwardly engaged. And that kind of persisted through the day until at one point, one of the coaches, we were asked before an exercise, does anybody have any withholds, anything they need to say to be present and come and do integrity? And one of the coaches just looked at me and went, Justin, you're hiding. I took that in and I went, okay, interesting. And I was like, hey, thanks, man. I could see how that's true. I can try that on. We finished that session and I went and I grabbed him and I said, hey, man, can I get some time with you? Can I get some support here? And he said, yeah. And I said, I can see how this is true. I want to play with it here. And he said, great. Okay. How do you want to play with it? And I embodied the hiding pattern in that moment, right? So I went down. I actually let myself hide, right? Kind of tuck in. We play a lot with embodying patterns in the conscious leadership group. And I was just feeling into the somatics of hiding. It's tense. It's tight. It's comfortable, but there's a lot of energy excreted. And at some point, I just said aloud, man, this is exhausting. I want to be done with this. And in that moment, he grabbed onto that and he just literally echoed those exact words back. This is exhausting. I want to, or I'm ready to be done with this. And in that moment, it was just there was a flash. There was an opening of possibility for a flash, and I immediately constricted around it because part of me was like, hell no. But I saw the opening, which was, I'm done here. I'm done at the retreat. I'm done with the program. I'm done with this. Now, again, there was so much inside of me, such an identity, so much that was like, well, you can't do that. You can't leave. You're 2 days away. And I was fortunate in that space to have a coach there who I said, okay, I don't even want to say this, but I'm going to out myself because we're here. The thought I'm having is I'm done here. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, I'm done in the circle. I'm done with the program. I'm ready to go. And I said, I'm not ready to commit yet, but that's what opened up for me. And he really beautifully held space and he said, great. He said, would you be willing to just take that for a walk? You're not making a decision. There's no decision, but I really felt and trusted you when you said, I'm not ready to commit, but I think I want to go. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll take it for a walk. And he said, and here's what to do. Just feel, he said, side by side test this. Side by side testing. I'm done. I'm going to exit the circle and I'm going to go home and I'm going to stay for 2 days. I did. So I got up and we were in the middle of a beautiful area in Michigan. I just took it for a walk and I just A/B tested it. And pretty quickly I just started going, oh crap. Because the more I tried on, I'm going to leave, the more the root just started digging in. And I was like, this is it. And I could feel some constriction, right? I could feel, this is the thing where in that moment, the decision didn't make any sense to me. We talked about this before. It didn't make any sense. There was an old identity present for me that was really hooked on, you can't leave. That was my pattern. You can't leave, Justin. You work hard. You see things through. You endure through discomfort. You can't leave. But the body was so grounded in the truth for me and the pleasure of just, you're done. You got everything you wanted. It's time to go home. And even then, honestly, I came back and I still was scaring myself with it. It was such an edge for me that I had to pull him again. And I was like, it feels right. And he actually had to invite me into the decision. So are you deciding? Are you going to complete with everybody? And I went, yep. And he went, great. What do you want around it? And we went up and we shortly completed. And for me, the signpost that it was real was when I told the group that I was completing, there was such a sense, again, of that firmness, that spaciousness, that flow. It just, for me, in that moment, felt like the inarguable truth of what my whole system wanted. And then I went and I exited the circle and figured out the logistics of how to move a flight forward 2 days and get home early.
Thanks for sharing all that, Justin. And obviously, I think there's a lot to unpack here that I'm excited to do. But just as a point of clarification, you shared about the pleasurable sense of feeling complete. And I'll get more into this as the conversation goes on, but you talked about the lead up to this experience around turning on these different channels and the activating of this anger channel, not an anchor channel, an anger channel. And what I would like to understand, and there can be kind of discretion about this or respect to conscious leadership group or whatever that is, but was it only pleasure that you felt in terms of that clarity that it was time for you to go? Or was it also connected with a sense of, I don't know, critique or judgment or feeling that there was something that was not right for you about the situation and that contributed to your choice to leave?
What comes up for me was I had gotten everything that I wanted. And I experienced that container, the conscious leadership group, the container they create is so beautiful, but it's also very confronting and very challenging. And there's a lot of feedback. And for me, there was a sense of I've gotten everything that I wanted from here. And if I stayed for 2 days, I would basically just be enduring in this very challenging environment because both one, somebody else told me that was the finish line. And two, it would guarantee that I would get whatever certification I got, right? I wouldn't leave because I'd be afraid that I wouldn't get the certification. And so there was just a sense of I've gotten everything that I've come here for, so why would I stay any longer?
And so that's a great other secondary point of clarification here is that it sounds like in your completion, so you left this retreat early to continue that metaphor you said earlier, like you stopped 2 steps before a mile-long race, right, before the finish line. But it sounds like in a certain way you did actually complete the finish line. Like you still received your certificate or completed like the overall program. Is that correct?
I did ultimately confirm in the week afterwards that I was certified. But at the moment of my departure, I did not know what that was. That was one of the stakes. And in that moment, that was something I was confronted with. I had to decide for myself, am I willing to put that at risk for the internal truth that's here right now? And in that moment, that became a yes for me. It was, yes, I'm willing to risk that and figure that out afterwards. Now, again, I want to be real about the experience of this. I scared the crap out of myself with that, right? All the stories in my head were, God, this is what you invested all this time and money and you're not going to get the thing that said you did it. What is your wife going to think? What are your family and friends going to think? This is insane. What does this mean? All of that came up. And there was just a sense of I'm willing to risk that for the truth that's here right now and trust that I can figure it out on the other side.
I think, Justin, this is where it really starts to get interesting, right? Because I think when you were first sharing this decision, right, in our lead-up conversation to today, I could totally feel myself, and I think Gabe did as well to some degree, embodying one of those voices, right? Like, hey, you did this, you put all this investment around it. Why not? Why not just endure it to get not just a sense of completion metaphorically or internally, which it sounds like you were maybe arriving at anyway, but why not have the mile time? Why not have crossed through the tape and actually have an external sense of completion around what you did and that you were willing to wager it, right? Or to potentially risk it for that commitment to that moment of truth. I think for me, even hearing it again, right, is both inspiring and like exciting and edgy. And also there's a part of me that looks at it and is just like, I still don't get it. I still don't get why not just like looking at the cost benefit of it, right? I think I'm like, okay, what is another day or two, right? It's not like in my view, a huge cost for what would seem like a massive benefit. Again, I know these voices are present for you as well, but just sharing that even right now, hearing it, that's the voice that's slightly louder for me. And I guess I also want to just pause and appreciate you for allowing us to go deep on something like this together and just being vulnerable around this. And I think just recognizing that, right, that voice is still feeling dominant to me. I was wondering if you could just comment on that. Like, what is actually the cost benefit analysis that you made that ended up putting primacy on integrity in the moment versus what I might argue is like a longer term perspective where you could take that feeling of integrity, still capture it, and also have the certificate. and that's the thought that I'm having, and I'm just curious how you react to all that.
Sure. Let me really speak from the I here and also caveat why that might not have been. If I were coaching somebody, that might not have been the experience that I actually nudged them toward. So there's 2 things here that as I was having this both internally and as I realized afterwards were big, which is, one is, so there's this story here of why not just endure for the certificate? Why not endure just to get that? And for me, there's the certificate, and part of my personality is like, oh yeah, I want to cultivate this image. I want people to think highly of me and see me as being competent. And the certificate is representative of that. But if I really check in, I've got so many learnings from the year. For me, that's what's real. It's the transformation, the learning that I got. And this is another step in that journey of transformation. And I'm now choosing to be more dedicated to that than having the piece of paper, which is just a signal out to the outside world. I'm willing to risk it. Now, also, let's hold true. If I didn't get it, I might be feeling some grief and some sadness here. I ultimately did confirm it. But there's another sense for me, which is, this is a pattern that I've had for my whole life, which is I have a ferocious one in me who says, work hard and see everything through to the end. Always see it through to the end. Always see it through to the end. Always see it through to the end. And while that part of me is in many ways really in service of me, it also can be a way that I personally leak my truth and aliveness, that I come out of integrity. I can do this all over the place, right? Because my head says, yeah, just see it through to the end. Just see it through to the end. Just see it through to the end. And when I do that all over in my life, which is something I inspected when I come back, I'm really complete with a number of things, but I'm just keeping them going because my head, my identity really, let me not even say my head, my identity says, we just see things through. That's just who you are, Justin. I'm actually leaking my truth and aliveness. That moment of stepping away for me was also part of really allowing me to see what happens when I break a reactive pattern of mine, which is just try really hard and endure through, even if it doesn't feel right to you. Now, if somebody I was working with had the pattern of they always left things early, as soon as it got hard, they always bumped and didn't see things through to completion, I might have sat with them and gone, hey, we know this about you. So let's actually pause and slow down here and consider things. But for me, that wasn't my pattern. My mom actually afterwards celebrated me for it. She said, that was big for you because you always would see you. I would hate things through 33% of the way through. I'd be like, I hate this, but I'm going to finish it. And there was something really monumental around, I'm like 98% of the way through. And I'm like, not worth it.
Thanks for sharing that, Justin. And I want to presence the experiences that are happening for me as we're talking through all of this. And I don't want to make any presumptions about what listeners are thinking, but I feel like this situation is a complex situation. This is not the Disney happy ending, right? My son loves watching Disney movies and it works out great. This is one of those situations where it's like, wait, I'm conflicted. I'm torn. Like, why can't you just have it all, right? It's kind of continuing that idea Rahul said earlier. Like, okay, I get that the integrity is more important than the piece of paper, but why not also get the piece of paper? And it's great that it actually worked out ultimately that you did get that. But I'm noticing that sense of emptiness or kind of in myself, or kind of there's a fear or concern that comes up around it. And I think we can kind of make of that what we will. Like, everyone has their kind of own sense of that, but I think I want to presence that just for the sake of transparency. And I want to also say, like, we focusing on your choice, right? And it kind of goes back to some of those themes we were talking about earlier about how do we know what to trust, right? I'm in the midst of this big decision. I'm in this group. I'm being confronted. You mentioned that it's like kind of the exercises you were describing, they're confronting, they're challenging. To me, as I heard it, even when you were talking about that coach, that's pretty confronting, like kind of saying you are hiding to you in front of a big group of people is kind of, that sounds kind of intense to me. I guess there's the element where we focus on you, and amidst all of that, then, okay, which pattern am I undoing? And it just turns into a very confusing process. But also, I think it's worth to look at the system that sounds like we've talked about, sung its praises and talked about a lot of the values and benefits, that kind of great ideas that it's brought forward. But it also sounds like it created a situation where, I don't know if this resonates for you, but it was activating and confronting in ways that maybe contributed to the intensity of the process, or that were maybe not ultimately beneficial sometimes. And I guess I'll just frame that as like, okay, what is beneficial and what is not? But some of these dynamics of doing these practices, really activating these intense emotions and feelings within a group, and then calling people out and all this sort of stuff, I think play into some of the maybe judgments or caricatures of kind of personal development groups far beyond the one you're describing, where the best intentions lead to all sorts of confusing outcomes. And I guess that's from my own background, again, in Ren Shui and the work I'm doing, that's some of what I'm picking up on too. And I'm curious if that feels true to you and what kind of comment you would have for that.
I noticed the one in me who immediately wants to kind of like mount to a defense of that container. What I want to do is hold that back and first hold how what I hear what you're saying is true and then contextualize it, which is some of these spaces can be experienced as incredibly intense, including that container. Now, what I applaud the Conscious Leadership Group for doing is making that very clear to all of us coming in. They were very clear, this is going to be really intense, this is what it is, so just know what you're opting into. I think that level of pressure, one of the ideas in conscious leadership is 100% responsibility, right? We get to choose how we engage with it. And that might be knowing when to back off and take a step back. That might be knowing when to leave and be done with that. That might be knowing when not to engage at all. But I think it's important to know when the spaces that we're entering, whether or not we're really willing and ready to be in those environments. Or as you said, if being in that environment is in service to us at all. I think that environment was by far the most transformative environment I've ever been in. And I would not say it's for everyone, nor for me in every season of life. So I think that is also another really important component.
I'm just wrestling with all the different things we've thrown out here over the last few minutes. This has been really, really interesting, right? And I think that what I'm coming back to is this idea of decision-making and action, right? Is sort of the theme of this conversation. And just trying to put myself in the shoes of either making a similar decision or even the same scenario you were describing, Justin, trying to differentiate between the different voices or different signals. Because I think what's coming across in the way you're telling it, which I really appreciate about your approach, is you're very clear, at least now, on the primacy of, hey, for that particular decision, the integrity that you're holding in the moment and honoring that was actually in your best interest, both in that moment, but also in your long-term trajectory, right? Of growing out of this pattern of like, hey, I'm just going to do things because I do things, right? And then I think that framed that way feels really powerful if it's part of a continuous journey of living in higher and higher integrity. And what I've been feeling is like, okay, so maybe there's this signal of integrity that comes from within and gives us that sense of rootedness. But there is also, when you were describing that pull earlier at the top of the show and you're out of integrity, that you might be being pulled out. There's a part of me that's always, I guess you could say, like appreciated or valued that pull as well. And I'll give a specific version of that, because the way you were talking about, you're like, oh, I am someone who completes things. I really like that way of saying it, because I'm like, oh, that's an identity statement, which I think you had framed as a pattern. But sometimes identity statements are aspirational. And so it's a choice to be like, hey, I want to be somebody who always completes things. And so now it's an expression of a value. And there might be times where I feel out of touch with that value. I don't feel drawn to it. I feel a resistance to it. I'm feeling what I'm calling, maybe this is a misapplication, I'm going to say my moment of integrity or my feeling of integrity in that moment doesn't value or doesn't connect with that value. But there's another part of me that's like, I want to be principle driven. I want to be values driven. Let me always try to be as close to 100% around adhering to that value as possible. And so then it creates this natural tension, which I think is a great tension to have, right? I think it creates that space in which to examine and even more meta way, choose how we want to live our lives. But I'm curious, just putting that out again in front of you, how would you approach that characterization or that polarity or maybe even a paradox inherent in the way of thinking about decisions when you have these different signals that might be competing and potentially even at odds with each other.
Well, the thought I had as you were speaking is, like real decision making when the stakes are non-trivial, it's just messy. I think there's this desire to sometimes make it really clean. But Gabe, what you said before, you said something like it's complex and sometimes you can't necessarily have it all, right? So sometimes there are real trade-offs around these things. And there's just an inherent messiness and lots of tensions that come up in that moment, right? Like I'll briefly flash back to my decision, which was, one of the questions I was confronted with is, am I willing to risk the certificate for this sense of truth inside of me? And that's actually the question. There's not a right or wrong answer to that. What I kind of hear is what comes up for both of you on that question is, no, I'm going to stay for the next 2 days. And it's like, great, cool. That was it for you. But in the work, what I really want to encourage people to is get to the real question here. Can we get to the real questions? Where's the real heart of the stakes of the decision for us so we can be fully conscious and aware of what we're actually deciding? And the reason why I point to this body stuff, this like, what are the signals of the bodies? A pattern I see in me and a lot of the people I work with is an impulse comes up in them and they scare themselves with it, similar to how I did. That clamping down I talked about, where it flashes open and goes, no, I couldn't do that. And so frequently they just clamp down on it and don't even allow it. And for me, what I really want for myself and the people I work with is, can you just hold open the possibility of the impulse? Can you just let yourself want that as much as you want it and sit in the tension that presents to what your stories say and what your identities say and what your values say, and just sit in the tension and find what the real question, what the real decision is for you in that moment. Because there's so much for me to be learned in sitting in the tension of what all of these things say as they come up.
I'm a little bit at a loss right now of where to go. I think I'm just sitting with all of this. And I think a couple things I want to say. You alluded again back, Justin, to folks listening to this show. And so I want to thank you, Justin, for just sharing so transparently about your own process and giving us the opportunity to kind of look critically at it, look at like the different sides of it. And if you're listening to this and if you're like me at all, I think I'll just say like I'm feeling conflicted and confused. And I think, as you said, Justin, decision making is messy and complex, and we all face them. So if you're listening to this, I'm sure you have important decisions and situations that you're trying to work through and figure out. And I guess I'd maybe like to focus our conversation around here is in helping people, as we're kind of moving to the hour mark and have not too much longer left, is just helping us all to think through how we can have more effective and healthy and whole decisions. And of course, we've talked about that on our last episode with Nell, and we've kind of explored it. But when we're in these messy spaces, maybe it's also any kind of guidance or pointers for when we have to make these decisions that don't feel clear or don't feel perfect. How can we manage and move with that in ways that ultimately are healthy and beneficial to us?
I have kind of two separate clusters of thoughts that come up for me around this. One thing is when I tune into the experience of decision making, both in that moment and in general, what I would encourage people to do is really slow the whole process down. Because if we really operate from presence, what you're actually deciding, you're only ever deciding what to do in the next moment. So we can glorify that decision as like, hey, I made the decision to leave. But what it actually was is, I made the decision to ask for some support around some feedback I got. I made the decision to take that possibility for a walk. I made the decision to ask for support again. I made the decision, hey, I'm going to go up and say this to the group and see how it feels. But in any moment, there's the possibility for that to dance. There's the possibility that in the middle of me saying it to the group, something else started to come up and I went, oh, wait, this doesn't actually feel right. And so the first invitation is to presence, just to what's next in this now moment? What's next in this now moment? If we don't have to fast forward and figure out the whole thing, what's here now and what's the next action presenting itself? The other thing I like to invite people to is we talked about body, and if commonly in this, there's head, heart, gut, right? Those are the intelligence centers that we're talking about. And a mentor pointed something out to me, which is when we access these, it can be really helpful to access them purely without some cross-pollination, because sometimes it can get confusing. For example, if I'm coaching somebody and I want them to tap into what their body center says, I'll go, cool, body center is intuitive, it's just gut. So what does your gut have to say about this? 3, 2, 1, go. Don't think, don't feel, just blurt, just hurl it out of you. And it's a really useful practice because people will just blurt something out and surprise themselves. Same thing with heart center. It's feel into your emotions. When you really consider this thing, just what are the feelings that come up? Pure feelings. Don't think about this. Don't go down in your body. Just what emotions come up? And then the last one, which I think is really helpful, especially for me, I'm more of like an emotional heart type, is when I'm using my head center, when we go up and we go to think about it, somebody said, literally, like, imagine severing your head. Imagine cutting your head off. Get to real, crisp, clear, like mathematician rationality. Totally take it off and just go, if I analyze this perfectly rationally, what are the facts and what do the facts say? And I find it really helpful to actually tap into those intelligence centers totally differently and then see how they line up and what's informed.
I'm really glad you took it there, Justin. That was actually going to be one of my questions right now. And what it got me thinking about just this whole characterization is what I've been sensing myself is this around the decision that you made, this like feeling of like rightness, like, hey, there is a right and a wrong decision. And I think that it's reflective of a little bit of more of like a narrow aperture, I think, than what you've provided here, right? And what I mean by that is this idea that recognizing that there are trade-offs in decisions like this. And while it might feel on one side of the aisle that, hey, like, just endure for 2 days and you get the certificate and you're all fine and dandy. The trade-off that's not being recognized and looking at it solely in that way is you had this, what I would describe as nothing short of a crucible moment to really deeply invest in and embody this principle of integrity in a quite challenging, potentially seemingly lopsided context on the surface. And you did it. You honored that. And it's like, I think that decision and that weight it's feeling much more real to me now as we've navigated this conversation. And I think the way I'm characterizing it is there are trade-offs, right, in any of these messy situations. Ideally, you get an opportunity to test and try it and feel into it, which you did, right, which you explained. And then the important part is once we've uncovered what we want to do, the heavier decision, not the micro decision that got us there, but the heavy decision to leave, the follow through is actually very important. Not the follow through just on like, hey, deciding to leave the program, but viewing that decision in this larger context of I am following through, I'm going to follow through on living a high integrity life, right? Whatever that means to you. And this is a big step in terms of that goal or that trajectory of your life. And I don't know if you would agree with that characterization, but that's really, I think, what's coming up for me is that like the head is what was really active in judging, right? I'll just come out and say judging your decision, right? That how could you do that? Like, how could you be at the 2 steps away? Like I ran cross country and track. Like you never just fall short of the finish line. But no, like there's something potentially much bigger here, at least for you, in what you were going through and what you were experiencing. And I'm just going to pause there and like see if that characterization resonates with you, Justin, and what you take from all of that.
I'm just laughing that it's like, yeah, all the judgments that are surfacing for you, they were all in my head in that moment too. Right. It was so present. And, there's the Rumi quote, right? Like, there's a land beyond right and wrong. I'll meet you there. That's another thing, which is if we can just hold these decisions in these moments, what if there was no right or wrong answer? What if there's just an inarguable experience that you're having? I'm having this impulse. I'm feeling these feelings. I'm thinking these thoughts. Again, this is the context work. What if the decision is actually primarily an opportunity to learn about yourself? It's a radically different orientation. And I'm not even saying that's the right orientation. Sometimes decisions have stakes. Let me tell you, sometimes I'm not going to relate to it that way. Sometimes it's going to be like, no, I'm trying to get to the best decision for whatever. But there's a different orientation that I think it's why these things feel so differently, because there's one there's a right or wrong answer and I'm trying to find the right answer. And there's another one, which is if I hold this decision, this circumstance primarily as an opportunity to learn about me, suddenly the decision doesn't matter so much because no matter what, I'm going to learn about me. I might have decided to leave and then felt a bunch of heartbreak and a bunch of grief and a bunch of regret. And wow, did I just learn something about? I might have chosen to stay and felt some other mix of things. But what I did is I, in that moment, decided to complete, and I felt joy and spaciousness and integrity. And I got to take some of those learnings back to my life. And that's what I learned about me. But suddenly the right wrong doesn't matter as much in this different orientation to a decision.
I really love what you shared there, Justin. And I really appreciate, Rahul, also the way you framed this as well. And I think this is just a really important place that we're arriving to as we kind of wrap up this show, which is this sense of wholeness. We've talked about integrity as an expression of wholeness. One of the things that I think happens when we go into that kind of right and wrong mindset is things begin to be more polarized. We experience things in black and white terms of what is up, what is down, what's right, what's wrong. And wholeness, integrity is something that it is complex, but it's whole. It's complex because it is whole. It's not so sharp on the edges. It's got rounded edges, and there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that in it. And as we're kind of building towards that in this conversation, I have to say, I just feel a great degree of love. And for you, Justin, in your process, whatever it is for this conversation and our exploration, leading us to a place of what I think is a deeper truth, as you said, than the piece of paper from the certificate, or even about whatever choice points you made in this process, but really about pointing to what really is important in life. You highlighted earlier, Justin, like getting to the core question of why we do anything that we do and what is it that we're valuing and caring about. And I think that's really present in the room right now. And I just want to really thank you for that and for just being so transparent and walking us through all these different elements of a complicated decision. And on that note, I wanted to kind of put out to you, I think you've shared some really great takeaways for folks, but if there was one kind of core kernel that you wanted to share with our listeners in closing, what would that be?
I'm channeling one of the heads of the conscious leadership group and a dear mentor, Jim Dethmer, where he asked the question, would you just let yourself want what you want as much as you want it? That for me is the access point to that body's like intuitive desire. It's just, would you let yourself fully have your wanting and explore yourself and the decision from there? Because I know in myself and so many people, we route so quickly up to the head to figure things out and kind of ignore that impulse of wanting. I just encourage listeners, would you be willing to open the aperture of your wanting as big as it wants to go and just see what happens?
Beautifully said, Justin. And yeah, I just want to thank you again for joining us in this exploration and for modeling, with us what this type of a conversation can look like. I think coming in with different preconceptions and ideas and arriving at where we did is in some ways not even necessarily what I expected. And I'm just very grateful that we got there and without even any attachment to having got to some particular destination. But yeah, I just want to thank you again, Justin. And for those that are listening in, I just hope that you're able to take something away from this and this leaves you with some thoughts, some ideas, some decisions to ruminate on and to think about from a wider lens. And if you did stick with us through here and you enjoyed listening to us, a reminder again to please share this episode with a friend or leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, to join our newsletter to follow along the journey. But once again, thanks for tuning in. And we'll look forward to coming back to you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.